Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining on our webinar on secondary billing. My name is Steve Glukh. I am the CEO of HelloNote, and we've had a lot of improvements recently on secondary billing. And secondary billing has been a hot topic with a lot of our clients. So I wanted to come on here and go over some of our features that we have with secondary billing, along with some frequently asked questions on secondary billing. So we have many different clients from different avenues of insurances. So some clients bill just Medicare with automatic crossover. Some clients bill commercial payers with no crossover. Some clients have Medicare secondary payers. Some clients have bill Medicaid. Some clients are self-pay. So we're grateful here at HelloNote to have clients all over the country that deal with different insurances and different segues into the market. And that allows us to grow as a company internally and help our clients grow. So we don't feel that there's a perfect system out there and it ever really going to be a perfect system. So that's why we really rely on feedback from our clients to give us up-to-date kind of insight and knowledge, because our own knowledge and the resources that we have, to put it in reality, it's not enough because the industry is very fast paced. There's always something to know and learn. So as much as we make updates on our end, as much as consultants and research that we do, it's not enough because we always hear different things from different insurances. Some insurances decide to deny a claim simply because there's another discipline involved. And other clients that bill the same insurance, they don't have that experience. So it's important for us to know what each of you, what every client is doing and billing, and we can make adaptations depending on how you know your insurances or your setup is. So we're very grateful for our clients and our internal team for bringing a lot of the features into reality. So if you have positive feedback, negative feedback, just industry feedback in general, we love to hear it and we make those improvements based on the system. So, and this is one of the reasons we're doing this webinar, is because secondary billing is not always clean and clear cut for a lot of clients. So we want to make sure that we make it as simple as possible and streamline the process for you. So first thing I want to do is I want to start with an FAQ on secondary billing. So I have this pulled up here, this document. Also, we'll share this document. And I know it says for physical therapy, but it also encompasses occupational and speech therapy as well. So what does secondary insurance mean? Secondary insurance may cover costs not paid by primary insurance, such as copays, deductibles, or co-insurance. It only pays after the primary plan. So some of you are billing, for example, Medicare commercial payers, and the patient does not have a secondary insurance. This means that the patient will be responsible for the remaining payment after the primary. Now, depending on the plan, depending on the secondary, like for example, Medicaid, depending on your state, sometimes Medicaid does not pay at all, and sometimes if they do pay, you cannot charge a remaining amount to a client, to a beneficiary, if they have Medicaid, especially if they're involved in a plan that's low income or something like that. So you do have to know your state rules and payer rules. That is important. But if the patient does have a secondary plan, usually that they pay into it, a lot of times that they will cover the remaining cost that the primary insurance does not. And sometimes that can be a copay, that could be a deductible, a co-insurance. It really depends on what the plan does cover. So with Medicare, traditional Medicare Part B, they cover 80% of the allowable amount. So you'll get 80%, and 20% will be covered by the supplemental or falls directly on the patient, depending on the situation. So next is, do I have to bill secondary insurance? So most practices bill both primary and secondary, but patients must ensure their coordination of benefits is updated. So it really is important. You can't not bill a secondary if the patient has a secondary. Okay, so most practices bill both. However, if there's no secondary involved, then that does fall on the patient. But again, depending on the situation, you might not be able to bill the patient that secondary. For example, with some states with Medicaid, even though Medicaid will not pay, the patient won't pay either, and you're not allowed to go and collect it from the patient. So it is state dependent because Medicaid is a state run plan, whereas Medicare, traditional Medicare, is federally run. So what is coordination of benefits? So COB, coordination of benefits, determines which insurance pays first. If it's not updated, secondary may deny claims until corrected. So, and I'll show you this in HelloNote and how to set up if there is a Medicare secondary payer, for example. It is really important to know if you're billing the right insurance. Sometimes you bill an insurance only to find that you get a rejection or a denial because there's another insurance involved. So sometimes, for example, you'll bill, I'll give an example, like real world examples that our clients have. Sometimes they get presented a Medicare card from their patient and they bill the insurance and then they get a denial. Sometimes it's because the ID number was wrong. If it's ID number wrong, then it's a simple fix and you could still get paid. However, more importantly, if you didn't properly check eligibility, the patient might have something called a railroad plan. So that goes through a different MAC and you can definitely get credentialed for it. It's not as extensive credentialing as traditional Medicare, but it still requires some work to be done. Even though the card looks the same, and I'm speaking from experience here, where we have a lot of clients that fall into this, they try to build their traditional Medicare plan only to get a rejection that it's another payer, and then they realize that it's a Medicare railroad plan. So it is important to know which insurance you're billing, or sometimes you'll get a denial that says this plan is not covered by this insurance, and then you have to go and see which actual insurance the patient has. So for example, the patient might have a Blue Cross Blue Shield as a primary and Medicare as a secondary. So if you're not billing the right insurance as a primary, you're going to get a denial because the secondary will need an EOB or coordination of benefits to make sure that all the numbers align for them to pay. Okay, so the good news here is that you can always fix these. You can always re-upload the claim in HelloNote. So it's really important to know that process, how to correct the claim. But personally, I think it's important to stay up to date and make sure when you're collecting information from a patient and you have a good system in place to check eligibility to ensure that you don't fall into that, because you want to have 100% acceptance rate when you bill. So if you do bill and you don't get paid, then it's fine. You can always correct it. But be careful, because if you are not in network and the patient only has in-network benefits, then you might not be able to bill the insurance because they will tell you you're not in network. And if you did want to get in network, it might not be backdated to get paid. So eligibility is really important, and I'll go over eligibility a little bit later in this webinar. So next is, do I need to submit the explanation of benefit, which is the EOB? So yes, and secondary insurance generally require the primary EOB to process payment. So very important. If you have an insurance, a primary insurance, and they automatically forward to secondary, such as a traditional Medicare B plan, a lot of them, most of the time, they automatically forward to the secondary, whether it's Aetna or Humana, ARP, whoever it is. So a lot of times they'll automatically submit the secondary, the EOB electronically, so you don't have to do anything. So with traditional Medicare, things are pretty easy as long as there is a secondary on file with Medicare. They will do that process for you. So you don't have to do anything manually. However, let's say that there is no secondary that Medicare knows of. And this can happen as well. So it's not common, but it does happen where the patient has a primary of Medicare B, for example, and then they have, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield as a secondary. So sometimes that Blue Cross Blue Shield will never get that claim, that secondary claim. Why? Because Medicare might not have it on file. And recently, we actually have been hearing that Blue Cross Blue Shield is actually charging the clinic additional fees to do that, to actually automatically submit it. So, and this is what I mean by we're always learning different things. And it doesn't mean it happens for every state, every plan, but it can happen to one clinic and not another. So we love to get that feedback so we know what to do on our end in order to smoothen out the process. So if you are billing primary and it did not automatically forward to secondary, your only option at that point is to submit a secondary claim manually. So what you could do, you can open up HelloNote and you can re-upload the claim as a secondary, which is the easiest option here. But then you're going to have to fill in all those payment amounts and adjustment codes, which we have a knowledge base on how to do that. So it does take a little bit of time to do, so it's not the most ideal scenario. So the best thing to do is, of course, for it to automatically forward. Then the other scenario is forwarding to Medicare as a secondary. So Medicare as a secondary, you do have to know with Medicare which Medicare secondary payer code the patient has. So it's called an MSP, and I'll show you that in HelloNote as well, how to select that properly. But it is really important to select the proper code, because if you do not select the proper code, you will get a denial from Medicare. Okay, so it's important to call Medicare. Some MACs actually have that in the portal. So if you go to your MACs portal and you run the eligibility there, sometimes it has it there. Not all MACs, but some of them do. So yes, submitting secondary explanation of benefits from the primary insurance is important. Some secondaries don't even allow you to submit electronically. Unfortunately, there are still some plans that we're hearing of that only want to get either a fax copy or a mailed copy, so a physical copy. So you can easily, and they actually want the original CMS 1500 or HCFA 1500 from the primary attached to it. So not only do they want the EOB, sometimes they also want the HCFA or CMS 1500 form. So which you can easily do by going into the clearinghouse and printing that off. So as far as the steps go, it's not complex, it's just more of the process. So we want to make sure that if there's a way for us to automatically submit the secondary for you, we can do that. So typically, if a secondary insurance has a payer ID, you can let us know, you can let our support team know, and we will set up an ERA with the insurance. So this way you can get those ERAs and EOBs in, but we'll also do an EDI. So this way, if we have to do it electronically, submit your secondary electronically, we can do that as well. So with the different clearinghouses, there's of course different processes. So for example, with Inovalon, they recently allowed the secondaries to automatically get submitted, even if the primary insurance does not automatically forward it. So once again, most of the time with Medicare, traditional Medicare, you submit the primary, and then it will automatically submit from the Medicare side to the secondary, and you get paid. Now, sometimes you submit the primary, you get paid, and then that's it. There's nothing happening after that, even though the patient has a secondary. So with Inovalon, we actually have the capability now to turn on a feature where Inovalon is now smart enough to say, okay, now primary got paid, and we know that there's a secondary. How do we know that? Because it came from HelloNote, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. And with that information, they will automatically submit the secondary because they have the ERA from the primary insurance. So I highly recommend turning that feature on. Let us know if you want it turned on, and we can enable that through the clearinghouse. But it does streamline the process a lot, so you don't have to go in and manually start submitting it. Because again, it is lengthy to put in all those COB amounts and adjustment codes and all of that from the primary payer. So with this new update, they actually do it for you. And now I know we do work with other clearinghouses, and they do that as well. So it seems like just the industry in general is trying to streamline this whole process, because secondary payers, you don't want to leave money on the table at the end of the day. We work really hard to run our clinic. We work hard for our money, and the insurances, don't always increase the amount we get paid. So every little bit we can get, we want to make sure that we get. So next is, the secondary always pay the balance? Not always. They may cover co-pays, but not deductibles, or certain services may still not be covered. So yes, so your secondary, or the patient's secondary, doesn't always kind of pay for every single service, right? So if there's a deductible, a lot of them will not pay that. If there's a copay, a lot of them will not pay that. They will pay the remaining amount that the primary insurance didn't pay, but sometimes they won't cover a copay or deductible. However, it is very important to know if they do, because if you know that they do, then you wouldn't collect that from the patient. Okay, so it is important to know the eligibility of the secondary insurance. So how long does secondary processing take? Usually 30 to 45 days after the primary pays, but delays can occur if coordination of benefits or the explanation of benefits info is missing. So we know with primary payers, depending on the payer, they could pay anywhere from a couple weeks to a month. The sooner the better, of course. So with Medicare, they pay about within 14 to 16 days on average. And then when it gets forwarded to the secondary, that's when you might have to wait longer. So here it says 30 to 45 days. However, there's some plans that we hear from our clients that just normally take 90 days. That's just how long the secondary will pay. But at the end of the day, if they pay, then that's great. We'd rather have a payment than no payment, even if it takes some time. So, and it is important to know how long each secondary takes. Why? Because when you run your reports and you do your aging balance reports, AR reports, for example, you might see some outstanding balances, but it's important to know, hey, I know this insurance takes 2 months to pay. So it's not a concern where you're trying to chase payment, right? Because if you don't know how long secondary takes, and again, when I say secondary, I'm just using that as a general term. Different secondaries can take different. So if you see Aetna as a secondary and they take 30 days, it could be different than Blue Cross Blue Shield, which can take 45 days, and so on. But it's important when you run your report so you know if you're truly missing payments versus it's just delayed. Okay. And yeah, it is important to follow up with these insurances as well if it's beyond the normal time. So you could see, okay, maybe something's wrong with the claim and they're not paying, because sometimes these secondary insurances, they won't tell you anything. They just won't pay you until you call them, and then they're going to tell you that, oh, we didn't process the claim because it's missing something, even though it was forwarded. So it is really important to kind of get to know the secondaries that you're dealing with. So next is, what if a secondary denies the claim? So reasons may include the COB not updated, services not covered, or billing errors. Patient may be responsible unless corrected. So again, it's important to know and follow up with the secondary so you know if you are going to get paid, and if you're not, what are your next steps? Is it the service not covered? Is there an issue with the billing? Whatever the case is. And I do want to mention here, it says services not covered. So some secondary insurances that we've heard from clients, they won't pay based on a diagnosis code or a CPT code, even though primary paid. So some of them are just denying it because they're just not covering that code. So we have had clients that had to call and fight them because they said that the primary paid, so secondary should of course pay. So yeah, it's important to know and follow up with the secondary to ensure that you're getting properly reimbursed. So can Medicare be a secondary payer? Yes, if the patient is still working and has an employer plan, but strict rules apply. So this is what I mentioned by getting that MSP code. So if your patient has a Medicare secondary payer code, then, or just the insurance in general, just make sure you call or you find out through the portal which code to use, because you don't want to get denied simply because you chose the wrong code. You could, of course, resubmit it, but again, the goal is to get 100%, as close to 100% acceptance rate. Do patients still owe money with dual coverage? So patients have multiple plans, so sometimes they still owe money, sometimes they don't. Not all services or deductibles are covered by both plans. So typically with deductibles, for example, the patient is responsible, and typically with a copayment, they are responsible, right? So you want to collect that at the time of visit. Just to give you some real world examples, we have clients that don't collect copays or deductibles up front, and they allow it to kind of accumulate, only to find that the patient then refuses to pay down the line. So you never want to get into that situation with your patient. So it is important to collect whatever they owe up front, and then you can give them receipts right away. So this way everything's logged, and you can keep your books accurate, and the patient doesn't have to pay a lump sum later on, as opposed to paying in increments for each visit, because unfortunately, it does happen to providers where they don't collect, and then once they give a bill to the patient and it accumulates, the patient no longer wants to pay, and then you have to deal with collections. And I mean, essentially, you don't want an upset patient, because this could be a patient that you might have a good relationship with, or even see them down the line, maybe later in the year, maybe next year, in 5 years, and so on. So you want to try to maintain as best relationship as possible with the patient, and also be upfront with the patient of what they owe. So when you check eligibility, if it does show that the patient has a copayment, a co-insurance, deductible, make sure you outline that for them. And sometimes patients don't understand what that means. They don't know what a copay is, or co-insurance, or deductible. So to me, it's very important to be upfront with the patient, let them know what they're expected to pay for every session. And with co-insurance, it can vary, right? With copay and deductible, like that could be a flat amount. But with co-insurances, because it's based on a percentage of what the insurance paid, and depending on what's being billed, it might be a different amount every visit. So what I would do, and I'll show you that in HelloNote as well. So you could set it up as an estimate. So for example, let's say based on what you bill, you know that the patient's co-insurance after 20% remaining will be approximately $15. So you could set it up that they owe $15 every session, and then you roll with it until you get the EOBs back. Once you start getting the ERAs or EOBs back, you adjust that once you start posting payments, and then you'll either collect a little bit amount from the patient more, or you'll actually refund that to the patient or apply that as a credit. But these should be, in the dollars or cents, as opposed to hundreds of dollars if you don't collect it upfront. So it is important to be upfront with the patient and explain the difference to the patient of what their plan does or does not cover. And last one is, how can patients ensure proper payment? So keep the coordination of benefits updated, provide both cards, respond to insurer requests, and check if EOBs are needed. So just make sure when you do check eligibility, you know the patient's insurance and plan, and you know that you have a streamlined way to get paid. So you want to make sure that you're billing the proper payer. Always ask the patient to provide all of their cards. So it says both cards here, but it's actually all of their cards, because they might actually have a tertiary payer. Okay, so respond to insurer request, especially if the insurance has authorizations. So you want to make sure that you're sending them whatever is needed, so you can get that pre-auth or auth number to put in the claim. And check if EOBs are needed. So if you have to do a manual EOB or manual secondary claim. So again, we'll share this file with you. Also, I want to point out that we do have a knowledge base in HelloNote. So if you go to support.hellonote.com, for example, if I click here, this is support.hellonote.com. You can ask questions, you can go through different categories, so depending on what questions you have. So here I have pulled up setting up automatic secondary claims in HelloNote, right? So it has screenshots, it even has a video. So I recommend you watch this. So I'll go through that process as well. So coming here, for example, I'm choosing a random dummy patient. So if we click on the insurance tab, So we could see here that the patient has a primary of Aetna and a secondary of Medicare Part B. So in this case, when you see Medicare Part B as a secondary, that is the Medicare secondary payer. Okay. So if I click edit, if I click actions and edit on the primary, okay, you'll see here that there is a drop down for secondary crossover. So what does this mean? This means there's a few different options that it's going to give you. Okay. So first option is default. So I'm going to click on this X to clean this out. So by default, when you add any patient's primary insurance as an insurance type, the secondary crossover is going to say none. And it says leave this option if automatic crossover or no secondary insurance. So let's break that down. So if there's a primary insurance involved, let's say Medicare, right? And that has a secondary crossover, then you can leave it as none, right? Why? Because it has an automatic crossover, so there's nothing really for you to do, or there's just no secondary insurance. If there's no secondary insurance, then there's no crossover happening. It's going to fall on the patient for the secondary. Now, if there's an insurance like, for example, Aetna, right? And then Medicare is a Medicare secondary payer. Now you have these codes here. So you see after every code, there it says dash Medicare secondary. So that Medicare secondary is the MSP, which stands for Medicare secondary payer. So you want to make sure that you select the right code, and there is a description here as well. And again, you can get this from certain portals in your Mac, and by calling the Medicare, the insurance, and they will tell you which MSP code to use. And again, if you select the wrong one, just because you selected a Medicare secondary payer does not mean you're going to get paid. Okay, so Medicare secondary, other liability insurance as primary is different than the working age beneficiary. Okay, so you want to make sure that you select the right code. So once you select it, that's really all you do. You just select it, you press save, and you're good to go. So you don't have to do anything else from that end. Okay, now if we go to edit again, and you click secondary on file, if you click secondary on file, now this does not mean that there's a secondary on file. Okay, so sorry, it does not mean that Medicare is the secondary payer. Okay, so this actually means that there's another plan or insurance that is secondary. Who it is, we don't know. That's up to you to put that in. In this case, I have Medicare B selected, but it does not have to be. And just make sure if you do have secondary Medicare B, you actually select one of these codes. You don't leave secondary on file. Okay, so once I save this, now I'm good to go. So in this example here with Aetna primary, Medicare B secondary, when you upload the claim to the clearinghouse now, it's actually going to show both insurances in there. It's going to have Aetna and Medicare B. So that means even if there's no crossover, the clearinghouse will know to automatically go and submit that. Okay, so that is really important. So now if I switch this up a little bit and I make this, well, let's leave this as Aetna, for example, and the secondary on file, I'm going to choose. But now the secondary is not Medicare B. Let's choose another insurance. I don't know, whichever it is. Let's say ARP, for example, right? So I'm going to remove the plan name, and that's it. So now in this case, because in my primary insurance, I selected secondary on file, this means that when you upload your claim to the clearinghouse, whichever clearinghouse it is, it's going to state both insurances, primary being Aetna, ARP being the secondary. So this way the insurances know where to route the claims once the primary paid. Okay, so this is a very important step. Okay, again, this is something new that we released earlier this year. So we really want to make sure that we relay this to everybody because it is important. Because if you don't do this, so for example, let's say you don't do this and you leave this as none for secondary crossover. So in this example, when you submit your claims, only Aetna is going to be there as a destination payer, and it's not going to have ARP listed anywhere. And if that happens, then and Aetna does not automatically forward the claim to ARP, then you're left to submit it manually for ARP. And you don't want to do that because it takes time to do it. Not that you can't do it, it's more of you just don't want to do it because it takes time and there's no streamline there. So it is important to do that. All right. So once again, actions, edit, make sure secondary crossover is selected. Okay. Now, how do you even get to here if you don't know? So if you select, let's select another patient. So this patient, for example, doesn't have any insurances added. So all you have to do is click add insurance, and you're going to have this pop up. You're going to select primary, and notice that as soon as you select primary, the secondary crossover box appears. If I select secondary, that crossover box is not going to be there. Okay, so make sure that you select primary and for the right insurance, and then you select the crossover as needed. Okay, and you can always go and update it. So for example, let's say you already have insurances and you didn't put in secondary crossover because you didn't know what insurance the patient had for the secondary. You can always go and you modify it. So from that point forward, things will be much, much more streamlined. So that's an important step to make sure that your secondary claims are going over. So before this update earlier in the year, it was more of a manual process, and we're thankful to have this feature now because we could share it with everyone. And we have been hearing finally that the secondary process is a lot more streamlined because a lot of the work it gets done automatically. So, and again, it is important to follow up and make sure that things are working for you. You can always reach out to us and we'll help you set it up if it hasn't worked for you, so we can understand why and resolve whatever you need. So just using this example again, we could see here that there's a $50 copayment here that was set up. So if we scroll down a little bit, the $50 copayment is input. Okay, so remember, you can go to visits and receipts. So we could see here that $50 is still due from the patient. Okay, and then when you bill that primary, everything will adjust. When you post payments, it's going to adjust. And when it's time for secondary to pay, you want to make sure that you have an ERA for it to automatically update as well. So yeah, everyone should have ERAs set up for your secondaries, because if you don't, you're going to get paper EOBs and you have to manually post the payment, which I know nobody wants to do because it's manual work. So if we can streamline it, then please get an ERA set up for those secondaries if available. This way you can get your ERAs synced automatically into HelloNote and you can post the payments from the import ERA section. So the next thing I just wanted to show is just running reports as far as balances go for secondaries. So one of the reports that is important for this, if I go to financial, is the patient responsibility report, right? So with patient responsibility report, you can actually filter out which responsibility you want. And we actually left secondaries here. So even though it doesn't fall on the patient, it's still a patient responsibility on the EOB. So you can select, for example, pending secondary and so on. But this is a very important step. You could even click on copay, for example, go back to, for example, beginning of the year, balance greater than 0, generate, and it's going to tell you any patients that owe you anything. So in this example, we have Harvey Wells owes us $50. They haven't paid anything yet, so you would know to collect this $50 from them. Also, you'll see here that there's an action button here to charge a credit card. So I highly recommend, if you haven't set up with Fiserv, that is our integrated partner for credit cards. So it allows you to store credit cards on file directly through HelloNote. So you can recharge patients' cards, you can send payment links. So it really does a lot of that collection work for you, because patients can pay directly, and saving their cards on file is a bonus. So that's important. So secondary payers can get tricky at times, and we want to ensure that we can streamline the process as much as we can for you. I know some secondary payers are a little bit more trickier than others, but at the end of the day, there is a way to get you paid. Okay, so it is important to do that. Now, we also deal with clients that do pediatrics, And we have some clients that have authorization numbers that are different from primary and secondary insurances. So I do want to just go into that in case you have that situation. So we did have to make an update on our system to accommodate that, which is now available. So for example, if you're adding an authorization number, okay, so if we add a certain number, we add 10 visits, we add the date from and date to, for example. We're still going to select the case. So now where it says insurance type, so here's where you could specify, does this authorization number get added to all, to essentially all the insurances tied to this case, or just primary, just secondary? So if it's just primary, you could select primary. So maybe common primary auth. Okay, and then you can add another one that's specifically for the secondary. Okay, so again, this is something that we're learning for different insurances. So we could do this as secondary auth. Okay, so we're going to link this here. So now, for example, when you do your billing, this primary auth will be the ones, and for the secondary auth, it's going to put in the fives. Okay, so because again, sometimes secondaries have an auth number. So even if primary doesn't have an auth, sometimes there's secondaries that do have an auth. So you want to make sure that you know that, because you don't want to get denied because you didn't get an auth number on the secondary insurance. Okay. So, and last thing just to go over here is in the case settings, I do want to show you, because this is important. So when you open up your case settings for your patients, when you're setting it up, so of course we have all these default things here, but then when we scroll down, so you have these note rules and you have billing rules. So in relation to secondaries and just billing in general, so you want to make sure that you select the appropriate rule in place. So maybe you don't want authorizations to get past KX modifiers, billing, treatment, and diagnosis codes to carry over. There's 8-minute rule and AMA rule, or none if you want to uncheck that. Assistant modifiers, applying additional modifiers as well. So again, we have a ton of different modifiers in here, so you can select whatever is needed to get your claims paid as appropriate. And also recently we added this service location dropdown. So just to go over this quickly, this is box number 2 of the HCFA 1500 form. So by default, it's set to office. So what that means is that in box 32, it's going to have your clinic name and your address in there with your NPI and tax ID. However, there's some insurances that don't want your office there, and they either want the patient information there or they just want it blank. So this is a change that recently happened with one MAC that I know of. So they essentially started denying claims because they didn't want anything in that box. Again, there was no warning. It was just something that all of a sudden claims started to get denied. So in that example, you would click none. So this way we just clear out that box number 32 and you can get paid. So another really important thing on this note is presetting the rules based on the insurance. So what does that mean? That means if you're adding patients and setting up cases, you don't want to have to remember for specific insurances what elements have to be filled out, right? A, it's a waste of time. B, we're all human. You can forget to click on a rule, either a note rule or a billing rule, right? So what you can do is you can go into settings, insurance and payer ID. And when you click actions, you can click preset case rules. And right here, you can actually specify, well, what rule do you want set up when you choose this insurance? So let's say for ARP, I'm going to choose these, place of service. I'm going to click time in, time out. Let's say I want to auto e-fax my plan of cares. I want this to be based on an AMA rule. Let's say that's it. So once I save this, so now I'm going to go back to patients. And if let's go back here, create a second case. So I'm going to click add. So now all I have to do is click either Aetna. Sorry, this one's linked to Aetna. I want to link it to AARP. I'm just going to switch this for the purpose of showing this feature. So we're going to press save. So now I'm going to click add. So once again, I'm going to click ARP this time. So notice now it says, do you want to preload the case settings for ARP? So I can make a decision. I could press yes to preload it or cancel if just leave it blank. So if I click yes, you'll see here that it applied all my settings. So, this is good either if you're running your own clinic or you have team members that are setting up cases. Again, for different insurances, you don't want to have a denial just because you forgot to click on a certain billing rule. Even apply modifier. Like I know with certain of our clients, they have plans that require, for example, a U7 modifier on all of their claims, right? So I don't want to have to remember to add a case, choose the insurance, then click apply modifier, U7, and save, right? So you can preset that in the insurance rules, and this way it'll automatically populate for you. So I think that's important and just allows you to streamline your process. So yeah, lots of updates that we already have. Lots of updates that we're coming out with, including a lot of AI features. So we're looking forward to releasing a lot of those. We will be hosting another webinar in a couple months as well on new features. So we're going to be sharing features that we released, also roadmap features. So our roadmap, towards the end of the year, we like to share our roadmap. From last year to this year, we already did a whole bunch of updates to finish our roadmap for 2025. And we are looking forward to sharing our roadmap for 2026. A lot of exciting stuff, a lot of integrations. So some really cool stuff that I know I'm looking forward to. I know you are as well. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your support, your feedback, and being a partner of service with HelloNote. So I want to thank all of you. Without all of our clients, we wouldn't be here. Without our internal team, we wouldn't be here. So we're grateful to have everyone on board. And if there's any feedback, any questions that you have, please let us know, whether it's about secondary billing or just general questions, and we'll make sure to answer you and get you paid. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. And this recording will be available as well. Our marketing team will process this and upload it to YouTube, and we'll share it through a newsletter as well. So thank you, everyone. Take care.